Hello, everyone. Dr. Yonit Arthur here. You are on the Steady Coach, and today I am bringing you one of my favorite kinds of content, a success story. In this success story, I am interviewing Vivian, who suffered from medically unexplained chronic dizziness symptoms that started in mid 2022. Now, Vivian, like many of you, went on the medical conveyor belt, got very few answers other than it's just anxiety and it's possibly all in your head. And she was fortunate enough to find my channel very early on in her process. So, just after a few months of suffering with these symptoms. Although it was something that Vivian was a little skeptical about, she decided to give it a try and implement some of the techniques that I talk about here on my channel. And to her surprise, she started to recover. So, Vivian is here to tell you her story, what's helped her, what tools have been most useful in her recovery, and where she's headed from now on. Of course, if you enjoy this interview, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to my channel or following my podcast. It helps make sure that I can bring this content to as many people as possible. Please enjoy this conversation with Vivian. All right, Vivian, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really excited to finally meet you. And I honestly didn't even think that I would be talking to you about a success story. So this is pretty amazing for me too.
Oh my gosh. I was telling you right before we went on air that this is by far the best stuff I get to do pretty much ever.
Yeah.
So it's just as fun for me to see you in person. It's
Oh,
just
good.
amazing
Great.
to
Well,
know
thank you
that
for having me.
you're out there and I was there kind of with you all along without knowing it. And now to get to finally meet you brings it full circle for me. So
Yeah.
my privilege.
Yeah.
So we have a whole story to get into, but before we get into your recovery story, let's talk a little bit about you. You wouldn't
Mhm.
mind telling us about yourself?
Yeah. So I'm 32 years old. I work as a personal trainer. So I
Mhm,
see people one on one mostly.
mhm,
And I help them a lot with strength training, excuse me, and just full body strength. So
mhm,
I work with people who are from 25 all the way up to their 70s. So I see a lot of different people every single day.
mhm.
Other than that, I would say that people would describe me as a mostly calm, go with the flow kind of person.
Not
Very
an anxious type.
What's that?
Not an anxious type, not a high-strung type?
No, I don't think so.
Mhm,
But as this whole process has taught me, I think that that has changed a little bit.
mhm,
And we can get into that a bit later. But I definitely do think in a lot of ways I'm very go with the flow and a pretty easygoing person.
mhm.
Fairly optimistic, happy. I think I'm a pretty good mix of an introvert and an extrovert. So I love being with people, but I like to, recharge by myself and, do my own hobbies. So
Mhm.
um, I think, yeah, that's kind of just a little bit about myself.
That's wonderful. So, I'm already kind of imagining this in context now because I know a little bit about what's coming. I haven't heard the whole story, but I know a little bit about what's coming, and you were living a super healthy life. I
Mhm.
imagine, again, as someone who self-describes as kind of having this balance between being an extrovert and an introvert and being relatively calm and go with the flow, you wouldn't necessarily have described yourself as being under a ton of stress on a regular basis?
I didn't think so because I just, working with so many people, you just hear a lot of details about their lives and the kind of stuff that they go through.
Mhm.
And when I hear some of these things, I'm like, oh my God, that must be so stressful, compared to the things I'm going through. Like this, of course I'm not stressed.
Right.
But I think what I have realized over the last couple of months is that I can really get in my head a lot. So even though I might not be as anxious as I think I am, I definitely overthink a lot, which can contribute to
Mhm.
like a certain sense of anxiety.
Mhm.
And just going through all of this has definitely made me more anxious just because I had no idea what was going on.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I think it's kind of a mix. I try to handle that by, working out and eating well and, trying to see friends, but I'm also human and I have those bad days. And I feel like this definitely got me in my head a lot more and
Yeah.
kind of spiraling a little bit more frequently because of all of this.
Totally understand. And I know I'm jumping way ahead
Mhm.
as I am wont to do. Um, I was just having a conversation with someone yesterday about, or maybe the day before, about how what number of people we think would never end up with chronic dizziness if they were just told from the get-go from their doctors, like the actual story. Like not like, "Oh, I don't know what's wrong with you," or, "Oh, you have a chronic health condition, you're never gonna get better." If people said, "Hey, this is stress related. What's going on in your life?" Most people go through psychophysiologic disorders like this. There's nothing abnormal with you. It's just that it's manifesting through your vestibular system or what have you. And it may be difficult for you to answer this, but if you had someone to sit down and tell you this, do you feel like that would have taken you out of your head a little bit?
Do you mean like if somebody had told me that this was a manifestation of stress?
Mhm. Yeah, if someone like, when you were going through the original, like, diagnostic routine and, the doctors and all the talk, because we haven't even talked about this yet, but I
Mm.
assume, like many other people, you went through the whole testing conveyor belt. Do you feel like if someone at that point had sat down and looked you in the eye and been like, "Hey, like, just so you know, this is normal," or "You're gonna be okay," do you think that would have changed how you reacted to it?
I think all I needed was somebody to tell me that this was normal and I was gonna be okay. To your previous point, if somebody and I actually did have a doctor tell me that this was anxiety related and, probably a manifestation of stress. I got very mad at that because at
That's a
that
good point. Yeah.
because I felt like it was just such a cop out answer because
Mm,
I didn't actually know what was going on.
mhm.
So when you feel like you see doctor after doctor and all they tell you is like, "Oh, you just have bad anxiety," with
Yeah.
no kind of like steps on what to do next, it's a very frustrating experience because when I went to see those doctors, my symptoms were 24/7. There was not a moment of reprieve, and it was some of the darkest, like probably some of the darkest weeks I've had to go through. So for a doctor to just be like, "Oh, it's just anxiety," I was like, well,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm very anxious now, and I'm sure
Right.
I was anxious prior, but
Right.
what
But
do I
that's not
do about
helpful.
it?
Right. 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 And actually, it's a really good point. Um, the delivery really matters,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the what to do about it really matters too. So
yeah.
it's not just, "Oh, this is a psychophysiologic disorder. Congratulations, you have, anxious stuff going on." There has to be some kind of acknowledgement that this is a nervous system issue that's happening, and to give you, like, really clear steps on what to do about it. Otherwise, you feel like I've heard people describe this all the time. They feel like they're going through gaslighting because they're like, "My doctor's just dismissing me. This isn't just anxiety. I was fine 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago."
And even if they had presented it with something like, "Oh, this is something going on with your nervous system," I feel like that would have been a totally different experience to have with my
Yeah.
doctor.
Yeah.
And like you said, everything was fine prior, so, at that moment, I was like, "Well, is the doctor just, like, really busy and, like, doesn't have time to explain this to me, or is it something else?" Or worst case, like, is it something that they're not picking up on that's physical? Because, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it, but I had, the testing done and the scans and everything came out normal. But when you're not given a clear cut answer and steps on what to do next, you're almost like, did they miss something? And that
Right.
makes you spiral even more into
More.
like,
Yeah.
what is this? Because you just
Yeah.
have it's never happened to me before. I've never experienced anything like this. So it was a mix of being really mad, really hopeless, really just frustrated across the board. And then, I found you and binge watched your channel and the way that you explain things just, made so much more sense. And I'll be honest, the first time that I found your channel, I was actually a little bit skeptical because it was hard to think
Sure.
that this was a manifestation of something like anxiety or nervous system related and that it could be fixed through, the different kind of practices that you talk about.
Mhm.
But I was also at a point where I was so hopeless after like all the doctors that I'd seen that I was like, you know what? Let's go with this. Let's try it. We have nothing to lose. And things started to get better. And I was like, oh my God, this woman's amazing. And you kind of fall into the rabbit hole of learning about
Yeah.
these things that doctors don't talk about. So
Yes. What a great prelude to everything we're
yeah,
talking about. I know like I said, I jumped way to the end.
me too.
So okay, so let's start at the beginning. So
Yeah.
how did this all get started?
Yeah. So I actually have notes here too that I'll
Okay,
share with
great.
you.
Then you
So
I have to tell you, pretty much everyone I talk to on these interviews has like a list or notes, and I'm like, this is what I'm talking about. My type A perfectionists who end up with chronic
Yeah.
dizziness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, everything was going well last year, and late August of 2022, I got really sick, and I was sick for about a week and a half. And I'd say after about 2 weeks of getting better, um, I started noticing these really, really weird symptoms. The first symptom was just this swaying feeling, like
Mhm.
I was walking but not totally balanced. And it wasn't really strong at first. So I was like, oh, maybe this is just like, just a little bit of residual stuff from
Mhm.
being sick. And then I started getting other symptoms like feeling like my head was like a bobblehead.
Mhm.
So for a couple of weeks, it felt like the right side of my head was just so heavy that it was just constantly wanting to like fall to the side. It's
Mhm.
almost like I had no like muscles in my neck to hold my head up. And when I was on the couch, I had to just lay like this because it was just really hard to keep my head up, which
Yeah.
is a really weird symptom. Let me just go through this list. So yeah, the bobblehead feeling. The dizziness, I don't describe it as like full-fledged dizziness, but it's this feeling that like things are just moving constantly, but
Mhm.
in a nonsensical direction. I don't even know if that makes sense, but like things just weren't straight.
Mhm.
Walking made it worse. I
Mhm.
actually tried to go for multiple walks because I always preach this to my clients too. When you're having a bad day, go for a walk, go get yourself a
Mhm.
coffee, et cetera, et cetera. But walking made it so much worse. I actually felt very unbalanced and tripped a few times walking. And like other people have said, um, on your success stories, it felt like I was like walking on clouds or like on a rocking boat. So that was really, really tough.
Mhm.
I had trouble sleeping for about 3 weeks, which is very unusual for me because, as my husband will tell you, I can fall asleep anywhere and very quickly, and I'm out like a light. So to get up every 2 hours, like in the middle of the night, and just not be able to sleep was very strange for me. I had a really high heart rate for several weeks, which was worrisome. Like on the walks that I would go on, my heart rate
Mhm.
would jump to like 150. So
Whoa.
it was pretty high
Wow.
for a while, but that went down after a couple months. The swaying, I had visual symptoms too. So one of the biggest ones was being in a grocery store was pretty tough. A lot of shapes and a lot of colors just were just too much for my eyes.
Mhm.
And the best way I can explain it is that if I were to look like on a shelf from left to right, like I was looking, but my eyes weren't tracking at the same speed. It just
There's
almost
like a
felt like my
delay.
eyes were doing this
Mhm.
across the shelf,
Mhm.
which was really, really bizarre. So I couldn't be inside of, places that just had a lot of like noise or a lot of different shapes, colors,
Mhm.
objects. And that was really strange for me too. Um, Being in the shower was like it was like I took 30-second showers because it was just so uncomfortable and I was so unbalanced. Cooking was really difficult, so like chopping anything was, not I didn't feel very secure in doing that because
Mhm.
again, it felt like everything was moving. I had a lot of brain fog, and the best way I can describe this is that when I was at work and people were talking to me, it was almost like I couldn't focus on them and that I wasn't present. It was like conversations were just kind of going over my head, and I was like trying really hard, but I was either like in a thick fog or I wasn't able to focus. So I didn't enjoy that one either.
Mm.
Um, Ironically, the only thing that felt good and that gave me any kind of relief was driving.
Yep. Yep.
Explain that one
Yep.
to me, Dr. Yo, because
Yep.
the
Yep.
only thing that helped me was being in a moving vehicle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And yes, I see this, and unfortunately, because all of these syndromes are symptom based, sometimes by virtue of that one issue alone, someone will get diagnosed with one thing over something else, and
Mhm.
it's not accurate. It's just a prediction error. So your brain uses these different templates depending on what you're doing. So if you're driving, it has a certain set of predictions. If you're still at home, it has a different set of predictions. And for it's not everyone. Some people with triple PD have trouble driving, some don't, but for some people, they get into the car, their brain switches templates, and it's in the non-dizzy template. Your
It's
brain's
so
predicting movement, you're moving, and your brain's like, okay, cool, reality matches expectations now.
it's so crazy how quick that switch happened because like I mentioned, my
Mhm.
symptoms were like 24/7. There was no break at all. But as soon as I got into a car, I was like, "Oh my god, I feel so good." And I would just honestly, I would just go for drives just because it was the only time I would get relief.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really strange.
What
But
about when you sat in the car before you started driving?
that's a good question. I'm guessing because I don't really remember, I'm gonna guess that it was okay.
Mhm.
Um, but I remember the first time that this all happened, I just kind of like drove around in the lot just to make sure that I could drive because I do have to drive for work.
Mhm.
And that felt fine. So yeah, I think that was okay too.
Yeah. I ask because that's such a neural circuit thing, right? For you to be okay in one place, but not okay in another, but then
Yeah,
it's okay while you're doing this, but it's not okay while you're doing something else,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So all of the symptoms you've described, I know you've heard me talk about a lot on my
yeah.
channel. You've heard other people talk about them. Can you tell me what your life was like at this time when things were really bad?
I didn't really think that things were super stressful at that time.
Mhm.
My husband and I had been talking about some big changes. We were house hunting and talking about some different goals that we wanted to achieve in the next couple of years. And work was going pretty well. So I didn't truly think that there was anything acute within that time frame that could have
Mhm.
set this off.
Mhm.
But I do think that there was a lot of stress that I went through since the pandemic started.
Yeah.
And I think kind of the accumulation of all of that
Mhm.
may have contributed to that. I noticed that, when I was talking to my therapist a couple months ago, my thinking had gone, like I mentioned earlier, very internal. It had gotten kind of catastrophic. I was always thinking worst case scenario about different things for no
Mhm.
for no real reason. I think it might have just been because of the stress from the pandemic and a bunch of things that
Mhm.
were happening.
Mhm.
Um, but after all of this started happening, I feel like a lot of things in my life just kind of started piling up one after another
I'm
that
sure.
made it a little bit worse.
Oh,
So
yeah.
a bit of bad timing on that.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Yeah, well, it's kind of this awful irony, right? I say things like, the dizziness is your brain's way of telling you to stop. Like,
yeah,
obviously, it's predicting danger, meaning your body thinks you're in danger even if you're not. So something's leading to that perception. But then ironically, your body doing that to you also makes you feel like 1,000 times more in danger because you also
yeah,
feel like crap. So it can become kind of this self-fulfilling cycle of just feeling like just awful and like everything's falling apart all the time.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree with that for sure.
So what was that like? So your symptoms came on, they progressively got worse and worse. You're not sleeping, you have all these visual symptoms. Are you still able to work at this time? Like, what did you do?
Yeah, so I kept working. Like I said, I see most people in person. So
Mhm.
I worked. I think it so this started in late August. So September was okay. And then there was one day in October where I went to work and I actually fell at work and
Mm.
anxiety went through the roof and I started having double vision. It
Oh
was
my
a
gosh.
terrible day. So went to the ER for that. They took my blood pressure and it was like 180 over 110. They took both arms. They were like, all right, things are going to move really fast. And they did a bunch of tests and scans and everything like that. And it was all normal. And by that point, like symptoms had been going on for about a month and a half. And I was pretty much crying every day. Um, I mean, anxious to no end, just like Googling nonstop, like what this could possibly be. And after they had done all the scans and, said everything's normal, they said, you seem really anxious. Here are some anti-anxiety meds
Oh.
to help with this and, good luck.
Mm.
And they kind of sent me on my way. And I remember I probably had one of the deepest cries in that doctor's room, probably for a good 15 minutes, just because that moment felt so hopeless. And at this point, symptoms were still 24/7. And it just felt like this was never going to stop. So, in terms of what life was like, it was very dark. It felt very hopeless. It felt like I wasn't able to, go about my normal activities. I was pretty much bedbound because just standing or walking felt horrible. Um, and just, mentally and emotionally, I was just toast. I didn't see a way out of this. And that
Mhm.
was probably like the climax of all of those really negative feelings just peaking.
Yeah.
And that day was tough. But that was the only day that I had taken off work. So, after that point, I had told some of my clients what was going on because standing to coach them had become very challenging. They were very understanding, and I continued to go to work. I sat for a lot of my sessions, and just demoed when I needed to, and
Mhm.
tried to keep up conversations as light as I could, and didn't really bring it up to them after that. Um, but it was tough. But I also felt like I wasn't ready to not work because like, what was I gonna do otherwise? It almost felt like I would just give myself so much time to be more in my head.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I was like, all right, I at least I'll go to work. I cut some of my hours so that I wasn't working such long hours, which actually ended up being a bit of a blessing in disguise because I was working with a lot of people at that time. So that ended up being a net positive from that.
Mhm.
But life was pretty tough at that point. That there
Yeah.
I wasn't, I wasn't as optimistic as I usually am.
Yeah. Well, I mean, small wonder, but
Yes.
but, I do wonder sometimes when people have to keep working when when they're in a position like yours and they are, like, continuing to force themselves to move. I feel like that can be actually really helpful for some people, because I know you've seen many of the success stories on my channel, but people who kinda end up in bed have often said, "I wish I had just kept moving." And some people can't. Some people's attacks come on so strong, they literally just can't get up and move. But
Yeah.
for people who are dealing with the symptoms that you were dealing with, it can be terrifying to move, but if they're able to move, it seems to kinda prevent them from going even further into the cycle of fear.
Yeah, and at that point, I was, Googling like crazy trying to figure out what this was.
Mhm.
I had, landed on the Facebook groups for,
Oh, no.
yeah,
Oh,
oh no,
no.
yeah, yeah, we'll get there. And you go into those groups and it's just, you know, really
Yeah,
sad to see all these people struggling so much. And, there's
yeah.
not a lot of positive posts in there. But the positive posts that I did see were encouraging of trying to live your life as you normally would.
Mhm,
So one of the things that I had started doing was asking myself, in this moment for where I am, if that was at work or at home, how can I make this situation feel safe for me?
mhm.
And that was where I had, come up with the idea. All right, I guess I'll tell a few of my clients what's going on and maybe just sit instead of
Good for
stand.
you. Mhm,
And I was able to apply that question to, like, in a lot of different ways, and based on how I was feeling, the outcome of that question was different every day. And
mhm,
from that, I was able to start seeing improvements, even though they were slow.
mhm,
Whereas, maybe I was sitting for 15 minutes out of the hour that I was with somebody, and the next day I was sitting for 12 minutes instead of 15
mhm,
minutes. You just kind of see progression
mhm.
through that, and that was a way that I was like, oh, okay, this wasn't as bad as yesterday, so that's good.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so tell me about the doctor's appointments, because I know after the ER, I'm sure you embarked on the medical journey.
Yeah, so I had actually seen a doctor prior to that because
Mhm,
as soon as this started happening, it was affecting me enough that I was concerned something was really
mhm,
wrong. And I had gone to see my primary care, and she wasn't really sure what was going on. So she was just like, take some antihistamines and see if that helps, or take your
mhm,
vitamins, and maybe this is anxiety related, so see where you can kind of reduce stress. And that was the first, like, okay, here we
mm.
go, this is all anxiety and stress related again, and just take some vitamins and you'll feel
Not what
better.
this
So
is.
I
Yeah,
didn't really get much answers from that.
yeah.
And then actually through that Facebook group, I ended up learning about something called a vestibular therapist, which I had never
Yes,
heard of before.
yes.
And I found somebody in my area that
Mhm,
was very, very well reviewed for working with people with these types of issues. And at this point, I had no idea that this was anything vestibular related. I
Mhm.
had no idea what was going on. So I was just, trying to outline the symptoms and asking what could this be. So I was like, you know what, I'll give this a try. So I met up with her. She was the first person that actually listened to me for probably 45 minutes in the same way that you're listening to me now about what's going on. And she said that, she's seen people with these kinds of symptoms. So she started helping me with like, vestibular therapy, as you've explained in your videos, with all the different balance and like visual training exercises. So I started doing that. Did that for a while. It helped, but not really. So I met up with her a couple of weeks after and told her that I wasn't really feeling much different. Like symptoms
Mhm.
were still pretty persistent. And then she said, you might have vestibular neuritis. You might want to see, a specialist for that. So then, the train continues and you go to the next person. And I went to see an ENT,
Mhm.
and she wasn't sure what was going on either. And she said that all of my labs came out normal. My hearing was normal. The pressure in my ears was normal. Um, there wasn't anything super concerning that, she wanted to check out. So she said that that could just be residual from the virus that I had in September. And
Do we know what that was, by the way? It wasn't COVID, it was
it was
just
COVID.
it was COVID.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm so glad I asked. Oh my goodness. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of an important point. Yeah.
Yeah. So she was just like, it might just be long-term effects from that, and
Mhm.
just, kind of keep an eye on it. And if it gets worse, come back. And then that ER visit happened and things got worse.
Mm.
So then they did like the hearing test and everything again, and everything came back normal. Um, and at that point they were like, you could see a neurologist if you really wanted to, and they could go deeper into what's going on. But I had accrued such medical bills at that point from kind of going from one person to the next with no answers, that I was just like, I can't see somebody else. Like I can't see one more person who just tells me it's just residual from COVID, or, just it's
Mhm.
anxiety, or we're not sure. So I actually
Mhm.
didn't end up seeing the neurologist. So I never got a, what's the word I'm looking for? No, nobody ever told me like, hey, this is triple PD, or, we think you have this, or we think you have that. I, to this day, still don't know if that's what it is, but it seems so on par with everything I've watched through your channel that,
Mhm.
I was just like, I guess I don't really need the diagnosis. I just need to know what to do to get better.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. So that I mean, I I applaud you for stopping there because some people just are so desperately in need of an answer for very
Yeah.
understandable reasons, right?
Oh yeah.
That they keep going down this path and they just keep getting no answers or answers that aren't very helpful. Like they keep getting different symptom-based diagnoses and more migraine medications and more anti-anxiety medications and more antidepressants. And I'm kind of happy for you that you stopped there. But then what? I mean, so you didn't have any answers. What did you do? How did you know what to do next?
I didn't. At that time, I had found your channel. I guess all of my Googling ended up being fruitful because you came up on my search, and
Mhm.
I started watching your videos. And like I mentioned, that at the very beginning, I was just a little skeptical because I was like, it can't be anxiety. I don't know why. I was just in my head. I'm like, it's got to be something else. It was almost like I was trying to convince myself that it was something else.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I was like, you know what? It's been a month and a half at this point, and nothing has worked, and no doctor can tell you differently.
So
It
this
hasn't
was
killed me.
when? When did you find me?
October, mid-October.
October. Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it
Yep.
started end of August, September, and now we're at mid-October.
Mm.
And at that point, I was like, you know what? It hasn't killed me. I'm still here. So let's try something different and see
Mhm.
if this will help. And then I ended up binge watching all of your videos, all of your success stories, and it was actually I found Julie's success
Yeah.
story.
Oh, yeah. You guys are like 2 peas in a pod. Oh my
Well,
gosh. Yeah. Yeah, with in
so
terms of your experience, I mean. Yes.
it
Yes.
I'm telling
That's
you, I watched her video from start to end and sobbed all the way through it because I was like, I mean, when she was describing her symptoms, like to a T, it was exactly what I was feeling. And I hadn't found anybody who had been through this. And no doctor was telling me, like, hey, you'll be okay. Like, this is normal, or, that like this will be okay. But hearing her go through all that and then come out okay was the first glimmer of hope that I had, that I was like, okay, this is going to be okay. 'cause like I mentioned, after that ER visit, it was like in my pit, like the pit of my stomach, I was just so hopeless, and it was a very tough feeling to move past. So after I watched her video 4 or 5 times, I was like, "Okay, let's try this. Let's go for it." So
Mhm.
then I watched her video, and I ended up watching your collab with Dan Buglio,
Mhm.
who's incredible, and I
Mhm.
highly recommend everybody
He
to go to
is.
his channel too. Um, I binged watched a lot of his videos as well. You both have a very calming presence to how you explain this, and you explain this in a way that's so understandable and so like you can just internalize it really well. And you just became my top two YouTube watches for a couple weeks.
Mhm.
And at that point in mid October, a lot of things were happening that were a bit stressful in my life. So having you two kind of like as my cheerleaders as I was working through this was
Mhm.
really important. And I had started implementing, the somatic tracking exercises that you have, the breathing exercises that you have. I also downloaded the Curable app
Mhm.
that also takes you through a lot of these different exercises.
Yes, highly
Um,
recommended.
yeah,
Many of my clients have found Curable super helpful. We talked about this off air too, that just it's very inexpensive and it's like having your own little coach in your pocket. Yeah.
yeah, it's been very helpful. I'm not a meditation person. I've
Mhm.
tried meditating a lot, and
Mhm.
I mean, they have like really short ones, but they also have a lot of just good um, like segments where you can just listen in on what's actually happening in your nervous system
Mhm.
when these symptoms are
Totally.
happening and why they're happening. Which
Mhm.
I think that at the root of it, once I understood why, I felt like I started to feel better. And I think from mid October to end of December, it feels like it was a quick recovery because by January, I felt like I was like 95% back to doing, normal life.
Mhm.
But when I think about the day to day, just so
No.
people don't think it was like it flipped on to off, like it
Right.
wasn't like that. It maybe went from 24/7 to like 22/7 and then to like 27. And then the next day was 24/7 again. And then the next day was like 18/7. And
So you
like
saw lots of ups and downs.
oh my gosh, pretty much every day was very, very different. And then I'd say around Christmas time, which would be a typically stressful time,
Mhm.
was a pretty calm time for me, and things got much better for me at that point, um, to where I wasn't really thinking about it as much. And I'd say from January on, I've
Mhm.
I've been pretty much back to normal.
Wow. I'm so glad you mentioned the ups and downs. I hope we can stay on that point for a
Oh
minute
yeah.
here because people ask me about this all the time. And in success stories, we have so much to talk about. We often don't talk about that as much. But I want people to hear that that is completely normal and that your job during those highs and lows is to keep going and to keep doing the things that you're doing. The doubts are going to creep in. They're going to yell in your ear like, "Oh, this is obviously Yonit's wrong and this isn't my nervous system and obviously I have something horribly wrong with me." And your job is to say yes and then keep going. Yes, and I'm still going to do somatic tracking. Yes, and I'm still going to go for my walk. Yes, and I'm still going to if necessary if someone's also already on track doing this, the emotional work. But this is part of the process. This is how it looks for everyone. And here you are as an example of someone who went through those ups and downs and came through to the other side and they stop eventually.
So to actually further elaborate on that point, so because I know sometimes when you hear like, oh, now I'm all better, and it's tough to hear that, especially if you're still going through symptoms. Um, like I said, it was not like an on-off switch. It took about a month and a half of just varying days.
Mhm.
Um, from January on, things felt really good. My sister got married. I went to Mexico for her wedding. Everything. I was really nervous about traveling, but it all went well.
Mhm.
Um, I actually emailed you because I had I, I don't know if like relapse is the right word, but I had an uptick in symptoms last
Mhm.
week
Mhm.
after not feeling anything for about 4 months.
Mhm.
And when that first happened, it like panic mode like shot up in me. I was like, I thought I was done with this. Like I thought I was cured and recovered. And like, why is this happening? And I had about 30 minutes of just like pure panic, and like the symptoms got worse. It wasn't as bad as the first time around. And I actually realized
Sure.
that after looking through my notes today. I was like, okay, it's not all of these things. It was mostly just like the swaying that had come back.
Mhm.
So that was relieving to kind of figure out.
Mhm.
But since I emailed you, the symptoms have been on and off,
Mhm.
not as aggressively, but they've
Mhm.
been kind of there and off.
Mhm.
But I don't wake up in the mornings anymore being like, what's today going to be like?
Mhm.
I feel
Mhm.
like when they come, I've learned through a lot of difficulty what it means to like surrender to it and just say, okay, they're here. Still going to go to brunch.
Mhm.
I'm still going to go to do this thing. I'm
Mhm.
still going to go, do what I was going to do.
Mhm.
But in the back of my mind, I'm always asking myself, like, I'm going to do these things, but how can I make sure that in this moment it feels safe for me? So maybe I choose a brunch place that's a little bit closer to my house because, I want to make sure if things get really bad that, but they never do. And things are fine. So just to kind of let people know that I think I've changed my perception of what recovered is and that it's not,
It's not
never
sensation
exactly.
free.
Huh?
It's not sensation free, like you're gonna live your entire life without ever having a dizziness symptom again, which to me is
Exactly.
just what you're describing is so common because dizziness is normal. And I'm not saying that the degree to which you're experiencing symptoms right now is normal, but your brain is still tuning into that stuff. So it's going to still amplify it and keep it on a little bit higher volume right now because
Yeah.
you're still kind of you're still in this like tail. I call it the tail. There's a long tail to this
Yeah.
recovery thing. I tell people, and I'm going to say it here, I have trampoline walking. I do not have any kind of vestibular anything, but I'm just a normal person. I'm like baseline. Okay. For all intents and purposes, I'm baseline. I get trampoline walking when I've gone for a walk and I've been out in the heat for a little while. Sometimes my vision's a little blurry, especially when I'm a little bit stressed out. Sometimes I have spinning vertigo and it's not like super intense. I'm not saying, oh my gosh, it's like a horrible attack where I'm vomiting, but like sometimes I sit down and the room still slowly starts spinning, but my brain does not care. It doesn't care. And so it comes and I'm like, my brain's like, okay, cool, that's weird. Adjust and something recalibrates and then I'm done. So it's like a 2-second process or what have you. So right now what's happening is it, your brain is still looking for this stuff. So
Yeah.
when something shows up, your brain's still going to be like, hang on, does she need to know about this? Let's turn it up a little bit, make sure she knows. And then you kind of continuing to send yourself, just like you said, those messages of safety is going to eventually teach your nervous system doesn't need to do that anymore.
Yeah, and I'm very okay with the fact that that might take some time and that it's not
Hmm.
going to be, again, it's not a switch, it's not on and off, but
Hmm.
things are overall much better. And I feel
Hmm.
like now that I have the tools to know how to deal with it, it doesn't seem as scary anymore. And I
Hmm.
actually remember a couple days ago, like the swing was pretty bad,
Hmm.
and it had been the worst that it's been in a while. But then I was walking like outside, and I was like, oh, this is the worst that it's going to get. It's not going to get worse than this. I'm going to be
Hmm.
fine because like I had gone through it before and I had
Right.
come out the other side feeling better.
Hmm.
And it was almost like it was just a funny moment at that point because I was like, huh, I would have never thought that, 5 months ago. But I think a lot of that is just because of the knowledge that I have, thanks to your channel and thanks to Dan. And there's actually 2 books that I would recommend for people to read that can also help a lot with this. One is Hope and Help for Your Nerves by Claire Weeks. Her book
Totally.
is
Hmm.
incredible. It says a lot of the same messaging that you and Dan talk about.
Hmm.
And the other one was The Mind Body Prescription by Dr. John Sarno, which was so illuminating in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
So having the knowledge from all of these different resources,
Hmm.
it tampers down the fear quite a bit. And
Hmm.
now, even though, these sensations come by, I'm not, I might panic for a few minutes, but after I remember what I need to do and, do the breathing exercises, do the somatic tracking, try to, do something fun. I know it'll get better. So
Okay, so what
sorry, go on
message do you
there.
have? Oh, no, I'm not interrupting you. I want you to keep talking about this because I think this is a really important point what you're getting at here. There are people who watch my channel who are feeling very hopeless and very anxious,
Yeah.
and they're going to hear this and you know how it was when you were super anxious. You would only hear the anxiety provoking things people
Oh,
were saying.
100%.
Right?
100%.
So you would
100%.
hear like 60 minutes of Julie talking and saying everything's going to be okay. But in 1 minute, she would say, yeah. And like one day I had a little bit of a sensation. You're like, I'm never going to get better. Right.
Yeah.
So what do you have any message for the people who are watching this and who are saying, oh no, she didn't end up fully recovering, or, oh no, she still has sensation sometimes. That means she's never going to get fully better. And this is forever. And this is chronic. What do you have to say to them about that?
The way that I view this is, if you're to picture like a graph and you've
Hmm.
got like sensations and like time,
Hmm.
at the beginning, it's like way crazy,
Hmm.
but then it kind of gets better. And then maybe it gets a little crazy again, but then it gets better and it goes down. And then it gets a little crazy again and it goes down. And I mean, I'm not at the point where, like some of your other guests have been like fully recovered. I'm going to be
Hmm.
honest, I
Hmm.
don't think I'm there yet, but I'm pretty much like 90% there.
Hmm.
And because of the trend I've seen
Hmm.
of how this has played out for me, I don't fear that I'm not going to get there. I'm just not so attached to the time of it anymore.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You nailed it. You
Yeah.
nailed it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, I mean, even though, like, we look at the peaks and valleys, as long as the overall trend is getting better,
Hmm.
I'm trending to get better. So it doesn't freak me out as much anymore.
Hmm.
Even though I will say sometimes I do panic, because it's
Of
natural to
course.
be like, oh my God, here we go again, and have that little bit of
It's not
panic.
pleasant. Hmm.
It's unpleasant. It is what it is. Like,
Hmm.
it's uncomfortable and it's unpleasant, but knowing the knowledge that I have and just seeing that trending pattern go down,
Hmm.
I'm confident that it will get better, and that confidence builds as you see more victories. So what I would say is, for people who are like at the very top and experiencing those crazy like sensations without reprieve, it's tough to see that it'll get better, because like you almost don't have any victories under your belt.
Hmm.
But as soon as you start accumulating even small victories, you will start, like, it'll just snowball on itself, and you'll get more confidence, and you'll start doing things that you were doing before, and it will just by itself start to get better. But at the beginning, it's so tough, and I have a lot of empathy for those people, because I was there, and if it's any consolation,
Hmm.
it does get better. But I do
Yes.
think knowledge is at the forefront of that. So, again, watching your channel, watching Dan Buglio, reading up on what's going on through these books, and that helped me a lot. So that would be the first thing I would tell people to do if they're at that peak and not seeing any kind of hope whatsoever.
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh. So just to kind of recap all
Yeah.
the amazing things you just said. So when you don't have victories on your own, you're going to need a lot of input from others to kind of help with your confidence. So read the books, watch the videos, just
Success
kind of
stories,
just kind of
especially.
brainwash yourself, like take
Yes.
in all that propaganda, like, oh, even though I don't feel like it's going to be okay, you're going to be all right. Just keep
Yeah.
getting that message in. And then eventually, once you do start to accumulate those victories, you're going to be less dependent on that.
Yes.
And I love what you said about just not having as much of an attachment to the timeline. I think that's the true mark of recovery. That's when I know I'm just that person's going to be completely fine, and I'm going to talk to them in a year and they're going to be like, "Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, yeah, that was terrible time back then when I used to have that happen." The attachment to the timeline, I think, is one of the big pitfalls that kind of keeps people stuck sometimes. They're like, "Okay, well, I have until this date, or if I don't get." This is one of the things my soapbox is, because I have heard people hear from their medical providers, if you don't get better within this amount of time,
Yeah.
total nonsense,
Yeah.
not based on any kind of evidence. It's just totally wrong. I've seen people get better after 30 years. It's just nonsense. But also, like, that kind of stress on people, that kind of pressure on people raises that danger signal and makes the nervous system more likely to amplify these sensations. So again, just you can't fake that. Like, you can't fake the letting go of the attachment of the timeline. But for people watching who are saying, oh no, you're going to get to the point where you're going to naturally be able to let go of it, because your life's going to be good. Life's going to be good. You're not going to feel 100% all the time, but you're going to feel great, and you're
Yeah.
going to be able to let it go.
And if I can just jump in on that, this understanding was not intuitive nor easy, nor, again, like I was skeptical of it. Like
Mhm.
I was like, no, like I need to get better in like 2 weeks. Like the understanding that you need to let go of time was a very, very difficult one for me, that I was very resistant to.
Yeah.
And it I have like this notebook that I always jotted down notes on when I would listen to success stories or your videos. And
Mhm.
my most highlighted and like deeply outlined sections in my notes was surrender and let go of like needing a time to heal. And
Mhm.
I didn't believe it when I wrote it. I didn't like internalize it. I didn't even know what that felt like. I was mad at myself that I wasn't getting better. I was so sad at all the time that I had lost to not
Sure.
feeling well and just losing out on like time spent with friends, time spent with my husband, doing a good job with my clients. Like I had all these like raging emotions in me. So accepting like, oh, just like let go of this like need to feel better by a certain time was almost like again enraging because I was like, no, like if I work harder, if I eat better, if I take the vitamins, if I sleep better, if I do all these things, then like I can control this and I can make it better. So if people are having a hard time internalizing that and kind of fighting against that, it's normal. And
Yes.
I think just kind of repeating the message over and over that time that passed anyway was helpful to kind of accept that. And then once I started to see those small victories, it almost proved that point to me.
Mm,
And then
yeah.
I was truly able to let go. But before I had seen some kind of improvement, it was very, very difficult for me to agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am in total agreement there. I know. I don't hear from them immediately because I know many people arrive at my channel via the Facebook groups or elsewhere, and they're like, "What the heck is this lady saying?" I don't think I'm insulting. I'm not saying it's in your head, but it can be like you said, people can feel very skeptical of this idea. But I think when people are really ready to hear it, the change can often be quite rapid. I mean, when
Yes.
it can be just like you experienced. What I work on frequently with my one-on-one clients who are kind of stuck is is exactly what you're talking about. It's not that so this idea of letting go of the timeline. Some people have an easier time with that than others. What I find some people need coaching through is how to do that. And people who come from periods of a lot of stress or childhoods that weren't so happy, who have kind of more of like this internalized perfectionism and this internalized, like, I am no good to other people and therefore I am no good when I'm sick, they cannot let go of the timeline. They
Yeah.
just can't do it. They can't do it without help.
Yeah.
So kind of piggybacking on what you were saying, if you're one of those people and you cannot let go of this timeline, then that's an indication that there may be some emotional work that can help you move forward, like that
Yeah.
can help you process that and surrender a little bit. And by the way, I want to be clear, when we say let go of the timeline or surrender, we're not saying, "Oh, I just give up. I'm going to be like this forever." But more
Right.
like
Right.
accept I'm healing, accept my brain's going to take time to heal, and this is not something I have to have like microscopic control over.
Yeah, and this is something also that Claire Weeks talks about in her book a lot, which is like you said, it's not just like giving up. It's not just like, oh,
Mhm.
it's just gonna be like this forever. It's accept what's happening and then let the time pass.
Mhm.
And that was tough to accept. But
Yeah, so
now
hard.
being kind of on the other side, I see the meaning through that.
Mhm.
But I agree, it's tough. It's really tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what other tools or advice do you have? I mean, you gave people a lot, but what were some of the other really important things that helped you or that you think would help other people?
So, I'm very lucky that I'm married to a very amazing man,
Mhm.
and he has been very supportive through all of this. He's gone to all of my doctor's appointments with me. He sat next to me while I've been crying my eyes out for hours at a time. He's, cooked meals when I couldn't, and he's done a lot while I couldn't. So having somebody who you can talk to about this and who may not understand, because truthfully, I don't think anybody can understand unless you go through it, but who has open ears to listen and to let you express those emotions.
Mhm.
I can't explain how helpful that has been because it's very I at least I felt that it was very easy to almost feel like you're going crazy when
Mhm.
these symptoms are happening because if they've never happened to you before, you're almost like, what, like, what's happening to my brain? Like, it doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
So to just have somebody to be able to talk to about that without judgment and just listening has been very, very helpful. So whether that's, a spouse, a friend, a family member, if
Mhm.
you have that person, it helps a lot.
Mhm.
Apart from that, the resources that I had mentioned, so the books, the YouTube channels, and Incurable has been great.
Mhm.
And watching the success stories has been really great because I
Mhm.
always make new notes from those success stories and I learned something I didn't know before.
Mhm.
And very similarly, like to how I coach people, not everybody will understand the same cue. So if I'm teaching somebody a squat and I'm like, all right, send your hips back first and then send your butt down, or feet shoulder width apart, or brace like I'm going to punch you in the belly. I don't, but like just
Right.
it's a cue. Not everybody takes that cue in,
Mhm.
so you have to be creative in finding different cues that will stick with people. And sometimes you don't know what that cue is until you hear it and you go, oh, that's what she meant. Very similarly, you can hear the same message again and again, but if it's told just slightly different or with a different word or in a different context of a
Yes.
success story, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, that applies to me. I get it. Like I get what that means.
Mhm.
And watching, different explanations of the same thing can help with that in finding that cue. And you won't know that you've understood it until you hear it and you're like, oh,
Click.
light bulb moment.
Yes.
So I think just kind of being on the search for that knowledge can be helpful. Getting off the Facebook groups was one of the best things I did for my mental health. So I wouldn't really go there.
Did you do that, just by yourself, knowing it wasn't doing you any favors, or did you take my advice or Dan's advice?
I honestly don't remember when exactly I did it. I just remember that I had started like a screenshots folder on my phone of success stories that I had read,
Mhm.
whether it was on like the very few that are on the Facebook groups or whether it was like on Reddit. There's a lot of
Mhm.
people that talk about triple PD, but I would be very wary about joining those as well because there's also a lot of,
A lot of negativity.
a lot
Yeah.
of negativity, but the few that
Yeah.
I did find, I would screenshot and I actually call it like my hope folder. So when I'm feeling
Aw.
down, I go to those screenshots and I read the success stories and I read, how people are getting better. And
Mhm.
that has always helped a lot. And it's right there. It's always on my phone, but I haven't touched it in a long time. So that also feels really good too. Um,
And I know you never joined, you never needed to, and this is why I love doing what I'm doing because I'm putting it out there for people, but I do have a membership community where we
yeah,
have this whole section called progress and a whole
yeah,
section called graduation where it's just nothing but positive posts, like nothing but look what I did today. Look what I accomplished. Here's where I was 3 months ago. Here's where I am today. Like it's just you have to see that stuff
yeah,
and you have to protect yourself, especially when you're in that vulnerable state. Like we talked about, your brain has a negativity bias anyway. It's
yeah,
looking for negative stuff because that's how your brain protects you from danger. But when you're in that kind of state, your brain is real. It's not even gonna hear the positive stuff. It's gonna take 100 positive things for one of them
yeah,
to get through.
yeah, yeah. I definitely agree with that. I feel like I had something else to say too. Oh, and then one of the things that I got from those positive stories was this very frequent message of live your life. And
Mhm.
I think at the beginning, it's very difficult to internalize that because so many things feel out of reach when you feel so unwell.
Mhm.
But trying as much as you can to get back into the daily flow of regular life was really good for me,
Mhm.
even though in the moment it didn't feel good.
Mhm.
And I go back to what I said earlier when we started this was, if I used to walk for 30 minutes, that doesn't mean go for a walk for 30 minutes. It means go for a walk for, 5. Does that feel okay? Does that feel safe? If yes, can we do another minute? If no, no worries. Go back home. But
Mhm.
it's just that activation energy of, that progressive action
Mhm.
to starting to live life back at normal. And that's where you'll start to see the victories, honestly. Like, because you'll say, oh, yesterday I only walked for 5 minutes, but today I walked for 7. And
Mhm.
you wouldn't know that if you didn't try it, right? And it
Right.
can be a whole host of different things. But that's where I had started to see that, oh, I actually, little by little things are getting a bit better. And that's where that confidence starts to build. But it's tough. I mean, it's, what is it? Newton's law, what stays at rest or objects at rest will stay at rest and
Mhm.
objects in motion stay in motion. It's when you're feeling that unwell to tell somebody like, oh, just get up and go for a walk. Like you're almost like,
Right.
do you not know how I'm feeling?
Right.
But it's true.
Right.
Once you do it, then you're like, oh, okay, okay. we're good here.
Right.
Maybe we can try
Right.
this. But if not, that's okay. Maybe we'll try tomorrow. So it's about really listening to your body and seeing what you can do right now.
Yeah, and even if it's in a very, very, very small way,
Yeah.
I it's such a trap that people fall into to say, "But I used to be able to," and I
Yeah.
am not I'm so again, I have so much compassion
Yeah.
for that. Like, I've said frequently that I tend to see very high achieving people. It seems to me that people who end up with chronic symptoms tend to be kind of the more conscientious, more successful kind of people. So I see people fall hard. I mean, it's like I used to be able to even, you do deserve to have time to grieve that, but in those times when you're dedicating yourself to moving forward, you want to just take it one day at a time.
It has to be. Yeah.
And it's we're not saying that you should push away your grief about how things are different, but see if you can allow yourself the space and time to do that and then come back to doing some of the work you need to do to get better and try to again count your victories based on how you're doing right now.
Exactly. Yeah, it has to be a moment to moment thing. And I'm actually
Mhm.
really glad you mentioned that because I think one of the things I didn't know about myself was that, I self describe as optimistic and happy.
Mhm.
But one of the things I'm working through now is being able to experience those less than happy emotions, and grief is a big
Oh,
part of that,
fun.
which is a whole
Yay.
different story.
Now you're speaking my language.
Right.
Yes. Good for
And
you.
this whole experience has been very eye opening that I have these beliefs about myself that it's a waste of time to feel these emotions and that I need to get back on it because I have goals and I have things to do and I have, like it's I don't know, it's just it's a tough mentality to get around, but feeling those feelings has been very important in this
Mhm.
whole process. So I'm very glad that you said that because it's so easy to think like, and I felt this, 3 months of my life gone to
Mhm.
just 24/7 symptoms that are unbearable. And the grief over losing that time that you could have had with people you love or doing things you love or, whatever else is it's you have to feel it. There's no
Have
getting
to.
around it. And
Yeah.
that can't have it's not an on and off switch either.
Mhm.
And, to this day I'm still working through that. It's not an everyday, like it's not an all consuming thought now, but working through that has been super important. So I'm glad you said
Mhm.
that.
Yes. Yes. Uh, again, so glad that you've mentioned that this is kind of a point of future work for you or something you're
Oh
still
yeah.
working on because I really think that this is kind of involved in that prolonged danger signal in the brain too. Again, I see people who are again very driven, very like forward thinking, successful people and I totally have been guilty of this at times in my life too, just like thinking positive and like not and just kind of like, yeah, yeah, that stuff can just kind of I'll just push that aside and it's going to blow up in your face one way or the other. These emotions are adaptive. They're biologically adaptive. Our brains produce them for a reason. They're trying to give us a signal that's important. If we're not receiving the signal, it's gonna cause problems for us
Yeah.
later on. So again, it's about trying to find a way to process them and use them for what they are, which is just data, and then
Yeah.
let them go. But if we're not getting their data, we often don't even know when that stuff's building up inside us and causing stress. Like again, I call it stress, but you can call it many different things, but often it's a buildup of that kind of stuff that leads people to end up in this state for a
Yeah. And you're
prolonged period of time.
totally right. Cause I had no idea that this was even something that I had to pay attention to until I
Mhm.
had to.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
I never want it to happen this
Mhm.
way for anybody or for myself ever again, but
Mhm.
it has changed me a lot in how
Mhm.
I handle situations and handle my emotions, and I have a
Mhm.
lot of work to do for sure. I'm not where I wanna be yet, but it has made me very aware of these things and how important they are.
Mhm.
So in that sense, it has been a good thing to come out of this very horrible
A
thing.
very horrible experience.
Yeah.
Well, and something good's coming out of it right now because you are sharing the story so other
Yeah.
people can hear it and know that they'll have another example of someone who gets it and who's through to the other side now. So, we're meaning making machines, right? And I think
Yeah.
there's something so beautiful and so cathartic about being able to turn your suffering into something that's meaningful for other people
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Yeah. I never thought that I would be talking to you. I
Mhm.
feel like I've watched you for many months and we've become good friends through these things we've never met. And every time I watched one of your videos, I was like, one day I'm going to talk to Dr. Yo and I'm going to share my story. But I mean, that came way later. At the beginning, it was like, let's just be able to stand,
Survive. Yes.
but you've given me a lot of hope. So I'm very appreciative for what you're doing. And you give, again, like I said, so much good information. You're very easy to listen to, very compassionate and empathetic and sympathetic to people. And it just, you really changed my life for the better. So even if my video can help even just one person, then
It will.
it'll be, worth it. So yeah.
It will. It will. You'll again, I know we talked about this before we went on air, that you're kind of in this process now of looking forward in your life and not being in the dizzy world as much anymore. But hopefully you'll come by and watch your video like in a year from now and just see how many people have seen it and the comments on the video, because people, these are lifelines. These are
Yeah.
lifelines to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, amazing. Anything else you want to add? Anything else you want to share before we finish?
No, I think I was able to share everything. I think the resources were just really all that I wanted to make sure I shared with you and in
Mhm.
this video. So I'm sure you'll link those in, the
I
comments and
will.
stuff like
Yes.
that.
Yes. Yes. I'll link to the books you mentioned. I'll link to the Curable app. We talked about this off air as well. I am an affiliate, which means that they share a small referral fee with me
Mhm.
when I send people to them, but I've been sending people to them for years. But it is a great app. So I'll put my referral code down at the bottom, under the video description as well. And then obviously Dan's channel, which is fantastic. So I'll
Oh,
put that
she's
in there
amazing.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, but just that, yeah, there is hope on the other side, and I say that as somebody who did not have any in the worst of this. So I really really want to make sure that that's kind of the overall message that gets across. So
Thank you.
yeah,
Yay.
thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Again, it's such an honor. I'm kind of starstruck to.
Oh, that's so funny. No, I honestly feel the same way. I know that's a weird thing to say, but I only get to know people through their comments, so but I know they're out there kind of like on like an abstract level, but then
Yeah,
to like meet you in person, it's like, oh, that's right. I'm actually putting these videos out and real people are getting better. Like real people like Vivian are actually better now. And that's awesome. So
yeah. Please keep
it's,
doing what you're doing. You're making such a difference. So thank you for
I
everything,
will,
Dr. Yo.
I will. Thank you. And of course, folks, if you have any questions or comments, I will do my best to answer them. Drop them below. You can like this video, you can subscribe to my channel, you can share the video. All of those things help me reach more people. So thank you all for tuning in. And thank you so much, Vivian,
Yeah,
for
thank you.
agreeing to talk to me.
Yeah, thank you.